And then after we're done, I'll send you guys the interview, and then as soon as you approve it, I would like to get it out this afternoon or this evening. That's how I'm. But
and I'm also hearing a heads up that I need to be doing more YouTube videos. So that's what I heard from you, Dr. Dominic.
I mean, listen, I think that when you're as intelligent as you are, when you're with an organization like you are, and you're not taking advantage of every type of media, and I promise you, and you already know this, idiots will, and they are. And so it's so easy to go viral with a conspiracy, and we desperately need people, which whether they're going to counter them or just give, and so someone searches the search terms climate, wildlife, whatever, they come up with your name and not RFK Jr. All right. That being said, that's my thought. Yeah. So
all right, we'll work on getting you on TikToks.
Yes. I mean, it sounds pathetic when an adult says, because it sounds like this real kid thing, but it's not true. TikTok is actually dominated. There's a lot of really good stuff on there. All social media sucks, but if you want to get your message out, you must use it. That's the world we live in. That's my nuanced theory. All right. I'm going to hit record. And I was just recording that last minute. I'm going to get rid of that, and then we'll go. All right. And just so you know, Rebecca, I will have already given you an intro, and within the intro, and I told Amy, a terrible news peg, yet a news peg, July 4th, hottest day on record, July, like this, so there's, I'll have said that, given you your intro, and then we'll jump into it.
Okay. Just so you know, on my side, it's saying recording hasn't started.
That's right. I haven't hit it yet.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And on my side, it's giving me personal information about your hard drive, which says Rebecca Shaw has low storage space. And the reason it's telling me that you have too much on your hard drive is because it records you locally on this app, so that if we had an internet blip, I would get your local recording and we wouldn't lose that.
Okay, so I'm gonna quit Safari, which has absolutely everything open. But
okay.
I'm not
sure.
I am on. But if something. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't had, except for just now, and it's probably because you're quitting stuff, any blips. So if we do, also if you have any problem hearing me or seeing me, we can stop. And
so I'm just quitting everything that uses a lot of so that it doesn't become an issue.
Got it. All right, I'm gonna hit record, and here we go. Oh, I got to get rid of Amy. Sorry. You'll be able to hear, but it says. The options, by the way, on this app say kick from studio or ban from studio. We don't want to ban her. But apparently, all right. Bye, Amy, and thank you. Here we go.
You might want to ban her.
Ban her. Cancel her. Okay, here we go. And 3, 2, 1. Dr. Rebecca Shaw, welcome to Stand Up. I am so honored to get to have the opportunity to talk with you.
I am so grateful to be here, so thank you for inviting me.
And thank you to a listener named Cliff, who said, you should have Dr. Rebecca Shaw on. I heard her on another show. I think it's called The New Scientist or something. It was actually a couple of years ago that you did that, apparently. And I went and listened. I was like, oh, my gosh, this woman's brilliant. And, of course, World Wildlife Organization is awesome. So I'm really excited to be talking to you. And thank you to Cliff. Lots to talk about.
Cliff is my brother.
I don't think Cliff is related, but he's a fan. He's a fan. I think you've got probably a lot of people out there, and you will now more, talking to me because you have so much to say. So I let in here with the news that July 4th was not only Independence Day, it was also a hot day, the hottest actually on record for the whole planet. So when you hear these kind of statistics, which you have done so much research on, what are your thoughts in 2023?
So the hottest day on record since we have been recording temperatures on the Earth, so it goes back 150 years, that is really, really hot. And so it's not the hottest the Earth has ever felt, but the hottest it's been since we've been actually recording temperatures. And to add to that, I think even more importantly, because you can have some daily spikes that are really outrageous, One of the things that's happening in the ocean is even more concerning. The sea surface temperature in the ocean is the hottest it's ever been as well. And if you know, we're going into hurricane season, and high sea surface temperatures means lots and lots of storms that are really, really big and really destructive. And so we're looking at really hot 4th of July and celebrations, and lots of people suffering because of that. But we're also looking at a hurricane season that's likely to be outside the balance of norm.
So
it scares me. I was just say it scares me.
Sure. And we're going to talk about a little bit about the psychology of it in a minute, but I wanted to take a step back, because you've not been on the show, and I've been researching you and prepping to talk to you, and obviously really impressed with all of your career and the work that you've done, the research, actual science that you've conducted, and of course your organization. So you've been with WWF now for a while. Just talk to me a little bit about, most people probably are familiar with it. It's a pretty well-known organization for most of our lifetimes. Tell me what you guys are generally advocating for.
Yeah, it's the World Wildlife Fund, or Worldwide Fund for Nature. We go under both names, or WWF. We work in 100 countries around the globe, and we really work not just on wildlife, as our name may suggest, but we work on all issues that pertain to keeping nature healthy so that animals and people can thrive and we can have a stable climate. So every place we work on the planet, we're working on protecting wildlife, making sure that we have clean water to drink, we have clean air to breathe, that we have a stable climate, and that nature functions to support human well-being.
So I think the problem in the world, all the problems in the world, are that there are so many different countries with different ideas, cultures, of course, laws. And when it comes to the environment, there are no countries. There's just a planet, the air, the water. Everybody knows what I'm saying. How hard is it for you, and how do you explain all of those differences and how you get them? And when we talk about the UN, you've been a part of the IPCC's reports, I think the 5th one, and we talk about the UN trying to get these countries on the same panel page. I don't think this is boring. How do you do that? That seems to be probably one of the biggest challenges.
I think one of the important things about the structure of WWF is that we live and work in all the countries, in all these 100 different countries. And like the UN, they have representatives from all the countries. And so you get these perspectives that are really differing from around the world, and you negotiate solutions in the UN, but we don't negotiate the science. In the IPCC, we do the science, we collect the science from around the world, and then we hand it over to the countries to make decisions based on that science. So it's evidence-informed policy making. And so the policy at the highest level is the same, but what you do about that, what you do about those targets that you set, say the 1.5 degree target for the planet, takes a really different form in every country where we work. And that heterogeneity, or the differences in how that comes down to the ground, is important, because it means if it's culturally relevant, it will be sustained. If you try and do something very top down, and we know this in our own country, it won't work. You really need communities to grasp and understand what the global impacts are, but find local solutions that they can feel comfortable with.
I don't want to name names, and I don't want to get to why it is the way it is, but it would seem that certain cultures and certain countries are more thoughtful, more connected to the natural environment for any number of reasons we could talk about than other cultures in countries who might be more disconnected for any number of reasons. Obviously, we can talk about poverty and wealth inequality and resources and access and corruption and laws. But is it fair to say that some places are a lot more connected and culturally relevant the environmental issues than other places?
Well, I think that there's some cultures that explicitly take nature into account in their economic activities and the well-being of nature into account. Say Bhutan is one of those. Bhutan, small country, has a happiness index, is very, very clear about how important a thriving nature is to the human well-being and to their happiness. Other cultures see themselves apart from nature, and some cultures even see they can dominate nature. and use it extractively without any consequences. And that's just not the case. And what we're seeing in the 4th of July, those heat waves and the high sea surface temperatures, is that there are consequences to undermining nature and the climate systematically over time. And we are really bearing the fruit. Right now, we're suffering the consequences of years and years of extractive economies that haven't taken into account the impact we're having on nature. I think it's not too late to do something about it, but it's really important that we see those two things as really connected.
Let's talk about the science. You're a scientist. It's never really been, I'm not good at science or school, but it's never been hard to understand the greenhouse effect to me. It's not hard to understand what is happening and why it's happening to me. But I want to kind of frame this with where we're at. It would seem the issue in the most layman of terms is how much are we putting out that's bad and how much are we reducing that's good. And there, in terms of renewable energy, how are we doing while we're still going to need energy, how are we doing to use energy that's much cleaner? And then, of course, people talk about, and I think about, and I read about, and thought about investing in, but I don't have any money to, and not sure if it would be a good idea. Carbon capture, companies that do that. So there's this other idea that eventually we'll be able to take out some of that. Where are we in 2023 with those inputs and outputs?
Yeah, so we're in a very unsustainable place right now. We have been pumping, kind of using the world, the earth, the atmosphere as a dumping ground for our carbon trash. And so we've been just spewing trash into the atmosphere. And if you just place the trash out along your house, you're going to have problems over time. Right now, we're having problems. When I entered this field a couple decades ago, we were sounding the alarm then, because we were seeing the trajectory we were going on. And we were doing all these studies to say, okay, if we look out into the future, what's it going to look like in, say, 2020, 2023? We never thought we would be having these kinds of impacts like we have now. The hottest temperature on record in 2023, a hurricane season that's unprecedented. We just didn't think we'd see these kind of impacts. So we need to do a few things, obviously. We need to stop dumping carbon into the atmosphere. That's a no-brainer. And you do that by reducing the emissions from our energy production or energy use. And you can do that most easily by shifting to renewable energies. Then we also need to be taking carbon out of the atmosphere. You do that two ways. You grow a lot of trees and you take care of the environment, because the environment holds a lot of carbon. It takes carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and puts it underground. It puts it in trees. So you can take carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's part of the solution. The other part is carbon capture and storage. When we were talking about this 20 years ago, we never even thought about the terms carbon capture and storage outside of nature and doing it in an engineering solution, because we just never thought it would be necessary. Now we're at the state where we absolutely need these technologies to come online. We need to use nature to store more carbon, and we need to do it technologically as well. So we're banking on both these types of solutions to get a stable climate in the future for future generations. Both of them are really necessary. And right now, what we're doing right now is unsustainable. We're still on an emissions trajectory that has us going to 3 degrees Celsius. And right now, we're not even at 1.5, and we're seeing these really unsustainable consequences. Wildfires in Canada, hottest temperature on record for 4th of July.
So talk to me a little bit more about, because you've got this long career, I guess you don't necessarily need to have been involved. You can just look at a chart with predictions and outcomes. You mentioned that. You predicted one thing, and it would seem, and most of the scientists that I talk to, and when I read articles, because I'm not one of those people who says, I did some research. I don't do research. I'm not a researcher. Let researchers do research. Google is not research. Sorry. How much of those predictions, some of the specifics and the outcomes were far worse when I hear from scientists than predicted?
Most of them are worse. I think one of the things, this is the reason why I love science so much. I love puzzles. And with science, you as soon as you figure out something, it opens up 2 or 3 more questions. And then you go after those 2 or 3 questions, and you're constantly trying to refine the science to get better and better. But it always moves in a single direction. So what we were looking at, say 20 years ago, was really how is our use of fossil fuels and our destruction of the rainforests, how is that affecting the climate? What we weren't as clear about 20 years ago was how the climate impacts the rainforest indirectly, or how our response to an increasing climate impacts climate. So if you have more warming, you use more air conditioning, creates more warming. If you have more warming, it dries the forest, creates wildfires, and you have the forest burn up, you lose that carbon. And so we got a lot better in the last 20 years understanding not just the impacts of fossil fuel burning on the atmosphere and climate change, but the impacts of climate change on all the other things that actually create more climate change. We call these positive feedbacks.
Yeah.
Positive feedbacks are things that are self-reinforcing over time. And so what we've gotten better in the last 20 years is understanding all those feedbacks and putting those into predictions as well. So without those feedbacks, we didn't get the answer exactly right. We got it directionally right. It's going to get warmer. We're going to have more infrequent rainstorms, but they're going to be more fierce with more higher magnitude, higher frequency. But what we didn't know is that you were going to have so many more hurricanes, and they're going to be that much more destructive, or you're going to have that many more tornadoes. But I think the thing that I always go back to is go back to physics. Physics is immutable. You can't change it. If you put more energy in the system, because you're trapping more solar energy, you're going to get more wild outcomes. And that's what we're truly seeing.
Your organization is one of many, but still there's not really enough, or they're not impactful enough, lobbyists for koala bears, for ants, for nature. Nature doesn't have a voice. We are its voice. We are also destroying it. But be its voice and talk about the coral, talk about what you have seen in terms of species extinction, because we so often look at it from, understandably, a human point of view. But I try to be fair to all the rest of the critters out there, Dr. Shaw, and I want you to speak for them right now. I mean, how are they doing?
I'll speak for the trees. Globally, animals and critters around the globe are declining. So we have, for WWF, we measure this, and we publish a Living Planet report every 2 years that uses the Living Planet Index to say, okay, if we measure how wildlife is doing around the planet, how is it doing? And what we find is that on average, across birds and mammals and amphibians and fishes across the globe, we've seen a 69% decline in populations around the globe. So this is across all these different, so it's an average. So some are going up, most are going down. But I think it's pretty significant that we are having a very dramatic influence on wildlife. But then we're also having a dramatic influence on wildlife habitat. So ecosystems are in decline and not functioning well, which is why we're seeing these massive wildfires, which is why we're seeing some ecosystems not able to filter the water in watersheds for drinkability, and we actually have to go in and put a processing plant in there. So there's lots of ways in which we're understanding both the breakdown of wildlife and wildlife populations, but also of the ecosystems that supply a lot of the services that we need for our livelihoods and for our well-being.
I don't want to be a jerk to any specific critter, but my understanding is that the most deadly animal is the mosquito. My best friend is an evolutionary biologist who works for the state of New York in their mosquito and tick lab. One of the concerns for humans and deer, and I even heard a story recently anecdotally about a moose that was found with 200,000 ticks on it and literally didn't give it Lyme disease, sucked it dry, took all its blood. The concern that I've heard is that as temperatures warm, that index you mentioned, some of the critters that are doing well would be those that are the deadliest, mosquitoes and ticks. So this to me is one of the scarier scenarios. Are you friendly to those? You're WWF scientist, chief scientist. Do you kill a mosquito, Rebecca? Be honest.
Mosquitoes don't like me. I'm one of those people who's fortunate enough to not have to attack them. Yeah, I don't know why.
Probably because they're familiar with your work and they know that you're keeping their hosts as healthy as possible.
Yeah. but if a mosquito went after my son, I would definitely take it out.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I think you're bringing up a really important point, which is there are some types of wildlife, some types of animals that are on the increase. And they aren't often the ones that we would like to see thrive. And so a lot of animals that do really well in cities, rats, raccoons, possums, crows, pigeons, they're on the rise. No, that is unmistakable. And then some others that are doing really well because their range is expanding. They're able to move out of the tropics and into North America, into Europe, like mosquitoes, following taking their diseases with them, are ones that we wouldn't like to be more abundant, and those are becoming more abundant. So it is an unpredictable world, and even those animals that we really are interested in keeping, the koala bears and so on, they're having to get up and move as well as their habitats change with climate change, and as their resources dry up. Say there's not enough water, there aren't enough eucalyptus trees for the koala, they are going to have to move. And of course we saw a really disastrous impact on their habitat, the koalas' impact a few years ago with the Australian fires. And so it's really not a good place to be a wild animal these days.
I think I heard you say this, my understanding, like about the koala bears, when those fires came into their habitats in Australia, they were like, what is this? It wasn't even natural to them. Like, they're not used to the smoke and fire even naturally.
Not at that scale. I mean, the eucalyptus forests are evolved to burn and to revitalize after they've burned, but not at that scale. And I think this is the important thing. There's always been fires in the landscape, but just like really big rainfall events or storms, they're bigger, they're long-lasting, they're more frequent, and they're more destructive than they've ever been. And so the koalas could have said before, hey, there's a fire next door neighbor, let's move and get out of the way. This fire, they could not get out of the way because it was so huge.
Let's take a fake caller. On the air now is the coral reefs. Go ahead, coral reefs. I don't know why they sound that way. I would like Dr. Shaw to say something on behalf of us. So
coral reefs have a New York accent.
Yes.
Which is really peculiar because they mostly are in the tropics.
Yeah, it's very weird. I don't know
that. So coral reefs, this is one of the ecosystems way out on the edge. They are going to have impacts from climate change from all sides, including the warming of the oceans, which, if you know corals, I don't know if you and your listeners know this, but corals aren't just one animal. It's an animal with an algae inside. And they're different types of corals with different kind of algae inside. And the algae grows in the corals provide the structure, and then the algae feeds the corals. So there's a couple things that happen with climate change. The first thing is it gets so hot that the algae dies, the algae inside. And this is why you have coral bleaching, is that the algae gives it all its color and then it dies. And then the coral dies because of it. So you get corals dying because of that. When the corals die, they don't produce the habitat, and the food dries up for all the fish, and therefore you have this cascading effect of this destruction over time. The other thing that climate change does to corals, which is just insidious, is that it doesn't allow it to create that structure because of the acidification. As more carbon goes into the ocean, it drives the ocean waters to be more acidic. It breaks down the calcium, and therefore they can't even build that structure. So corals are getting it from both sides, and it's all disastrous for corals. There are some places on the planet where the corals are a little bit more resilient. We're really focused on those, but that is a huge loss of species globally, and also a very productive ecosystem. Productive meaning it produces a lot of our food. It produces a lot of primary production for us. And so we are dependent in some ways, more or less, on corals. And so that's a really good example about how climate change is just creating the destruction of ecosystems on which we depend.
I obviously knew that about algae, but maybe some of my listeners didn't. Now joining us, both ice caps, but on the same, wow, I got them both to call in at the same time. Go ahead, guys. You're on with Dr. Rebecca Shaw. We used to dominate, and now look at us. Thank you for the call, guys. I'm so sorry. What do we learn about the ice and what it, and obviously the habitats that depend upon it? Everybody always talks about polar bears and penguins, but there's so much more.
Okay, so I didn't know that the ice sounded like that either. But
well, that was just one of them. I heard the Arctic, but I did not bring up the volume on the Antarctic. I think that would have been probably a fully different accent.
Yeah, of course. So ice is melting everywhere in a warming planet, and so in the Arctic, in Antarctica, and these glaciers that are in the high mountains, they're all melting, and it's really shifting. It really shifts ecosystems. But I think no more so than coastal ecosystems where a lot of people live, and the sea level is rising because of the melting of these ice caps, particularly from the Arctic and the Antarctic. I mean, you can't dump that much water into the ocean without changes in sea level. And we've seen sea level rise everywhere. And when you combine that with an increased magnitude and frequency of storms on the coast, you're just having sea level rise and then boom, 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 more and more destruction on the coast. So people are really in harm's way with the loss of the ice ecosystems. The other thing that I think is so interesting is just last week in Science, that because of the melting of the ice and because we're over extracting groundwater to produce food, we're actually, as a human society, changing the rotation of the earth. Because water weighs a lot. I mean, you take water out of the ground and you put it, and you begin to use it, and it transpires, and you put more water in the air, you put more water out of the poles and put it into the oceans. It's changing the way the earth rotates just by a little bit, but enough that it's actually detectable at this point. It's crazy. Like, we have that kind of impact on the earth.
I don't even know what that would mean if we change the way. It doesn't sound like a good. I don't think we should affect the Earth's rotation, but I have an associate's degree.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the associate's degree, you can understand this. I don't. The scientists who wrote this paper, who measured this, are not going to say it's the end of the earth because they don't know that, right? Mm-hmm. But what the thing is, we are changing the way the earth rotates because of the way we're distributing water on the planet, because water weighs so much. We're putting more of it into the middle of the earth. And so we're not getting that real tight spin, and it's beginning to wobble a little bit more. So that's just, if we can change the way the earth spins on its axis, just think about what we can do. And I want to think positively, like we can undo a lot of these things. It's not all disaster. So we can undo a lot of this.
Let's talk about that here at the end. In terms of solutions, you still seem optimistic. I mean, I feel like, and I also want you to say a bit about kind of individual behavior and government policy, because I have for years tried to do the right thing just because, for my own conscience, for role modeling for my kids, and so I could come on the radio and talk about these issues and be the change I want to see. But I'm far from perfect. So I got solar panels early. I'm on my second electric car. I got my first one in 2010. We cut down on animals, but we still eat animals. And probably one of the worst things that we do is we order, my daughters, I have 18 and 16-year-old daughters, they order so much crap. And I'll open a big box, and inside it's like eyelash extender, like the size of a pen is what I'm saying. And that's being sent here to my house. So I feel like the point is you can try to do things as an individual, but unless you do them systemically as a community and as a country and as a planet, you can't make that much of a difference. I'd be happy to be wrong. I know it makes me feel good in my mind, but talk to me a little bit about the solutions and why you see hope.
Yeah, so I believe all those changes we all make really matters. It matters that you vote, and therefore you should vote for the outcomes you want. That's the kind of input that we have as individuals into.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. You could eat cows all day. If you didn't vote, you wouldn't, or you could be a vegan. If you didn't vote, you're not doing as much, as the way I see it. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, Dr. Pete Dominick said that. Dr. Rebecca Shaw did not say that.
Right, but that's
but
my
you do
point.
have to.
No, I mean it's very important.
You do have to vote because what you're saying is absolutely right. You absolutely have to have policy changes and you have to have individual behavioral changes, and you can't have one or the other. You have to have both. You have to have something that gives you a strong steer, in policy or supports the way voters are going, and you need to have real individuals reinforcing that. So what you can do as individuals, super important, the driving electric car as opposed to a fossil fuel or a gas car, really important. Those kind of changes and supporting renewable energy development is super, super important. The food is also a big part of our greenhouse gas emissions globally, the way we produce it, what we choose to eat, and how much we waste. So somewhere between 30 and 40% of all food is wasted. Food is about a third of all our greenhouse gas emissions. It's production, it's transport, it's processing. So if you think about what you could do, and some of the food we eat has a greater impact on the earth than other foods. So animal protein, much higher. And within animal protein, beef and lamb, much, much higher greenhouse gas emissions than saying eating a plant-based protein. So if you just a couple days a week changed from eating animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins, and everybody did that, that's a huge step everybody could take. It seems insignificant, but it matters a lot. And one of the reasons why I have such hope is that a lot of these changes are being done, and these changes are being called for by the youth around the globe. They want to see change. They want a sustainable planet. So they're making choices individually to eat differently, to live differently, and to vote and to call on their elected officials to do things differently.
And what do you think of just specifically the transformation of our energy, how we get electricity? We could talk about the grid, but I mean, we can talk about renewable energies. Like where do you see, you've been following that I'm sure for a long time. I just read they finally started the wind farm off the coast of Massachusetts. But I mean, and that's great. But where do you see where we're at with that, or any other maybe new energy ideas on the horizon that you think there's good, reason to back?
Yeah, the mix of renewable energies is really important because not one kind of energy source works in all areas. So solar and wind and geothermal and hydro for sure. It around the globe, you get a different mix that gets you to renewable energy solution. But one of the things, I was talking earlier in our conversation about how we never quite predicted that things would be like this today. One of those positive things we didn't predict is that renewable energy would be as cheap as it is today. Yeah. So a lot of investment driving to renewable energy, production's increased, it's really driven down the price. And so now in a lot of places where it used to be the most expensive form of energy, it's now some of the cheapest energy you can get. And so one of the most important things to do is to get that stuff online as fast as possible, because we're not doing it while it's cheap and it's coming online faster than it ever has. It's not fast enough to get us to a stable climate. And so it's really important that we do everything we can to get more of that stuff online as fast as possible. So if you buy an electric car, there's electricity from renewable sources to actually power it. That's really the ultimate.
And batteries?
Yeah, batteries. I mean, one of the things you'll hear over and over again as we switch from fossil fuel to renewable is that the batteries become incredibly important for storage and for continuity of service. And those batteries really use a lot of rare earth minerals, and so mining changes around the globe. But I think there's even ways that we can limit the impact of those efforts to really fuel this transition to renewable energy.
There's just no source of electricity that does not have a tremendous impact on nature, on the landscape, but some are far better than others. That's is right. The way that I usually say it. Is that a fair way to look at it? I mean, as long as we're human beings consuming.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And certainly renewable energies, bottom line, better for the climate and therefore better for humanity. Because again, if we're going to see 4th of Julys that are going to be hotter next year, hotter the year after that, so hot, we're going to be like inside watching our fireworks in the future as opposed to outside watching them.
Did you watch or do you care about the food eating contests, Rebecca?
I have seen.
Have you ever competed?
Okay. I've never competed, but I never would after seeing Joey Chestnut.
Yeah.
In San Jose.
You watched him. You saw him. You attended?
Oh my gosh. Oh yes. Oh yes. It was
nothing else going on that day?
No.
There wasn't an accident?
No. So it was at a lacrosse. It was at a lacrosse game.
All right.
And he was the intermission.
Okay. And it happened by accident. You were at a lacrosse game and a food eating competition broke out. Go ahead.
Yes. And so before that, I had been thinking that could be an alternative career for me. But after seeing Joey Chestnut, I was just like, I can't compete. It's not
what
even
would
possible.
It have been? Okay, so if you had to eat as much, what would be your poison or your pleasure, I suppose? I mean, you're a very healthy person. I know you don't eat meat, right? So what are you going to jam in there? Cookies or fruit or?
Man, probably chocolate.
All right. Well, that's what we will have sent to you.
Lots of chocolate.
Let us know your brand, and we will corrupt you. Thank you so much for joining me for the first time. Hopefully not the last time. I learned a lot, and keep up the great work at World Wildlife. Everybody goes and visit worldwildlife.org. Dr. Rebecca Shaw, what an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah.